In New York, Joe Goldberg, who works at Mooney's bookstore, notices a young woman named Guinevere Beck walk in on a quiet day. The moment he sees her browsing the shelves, he's intrigued. As he watches her search for a book, they start talking, and he learns that Beck is looking for a book of poetry. While answering her questions about literature, he finds himself drawn to her voice, her expressions, even the way she's dressed, thinking she's striking yet natural. When Beck comes to the counter to pay, Joe learns her name from her credit card. Moments after she leaves, he begins to feel it was no coincidence they met. That night, Joe sits down at his computer and searches for her social media profiles. From her photos, he discovers she studies creative writing at New York University, has friends named Peach, Annika, and Lynn, and learns the places she visits, the things she posts, and the hashtags she uses. From location tags and background details, he's able to figure out where she lives. That night, he goes to her apartment, sees her through an open window, and watches as she gets close to her boyfriend, Benji. Joe quickly notices Benji's arrogance and lack of interest in her, and convinces himself she deserves a better chance at happiness. The next day, Joe runs into his young neighbor, Paco, and learns that Paco's mother is stuck in a toxic relationship. Joe gives Paco books, offering him an escape into other worlds. But most of Joe's mind is still on Beck. When Beck goes to a bar with her friends, Joe, having learned the location from social media, follows and watches her from a distance. Beck, now drunk, heads toward the subway. She loses her balance and falls onto the tracks, and Joe rushes to save her. He then takes her home in a cab. Outside her building, they run into Benji. During all of this, Joe has secretly stolen Beck's phone. Joe believes that the biggest problem in Beck's life is Benji. The next day, he sends Benji a fake message, luring him to the bookstore. There, he locks him inside the glass cage in the basement where the rare books are kept. As Benji tries to figure out what's happening, Joe remains calm and determined, convincing himself that this act is for Beck's own good, and that he's willing to do whatever it takes to make her happy. Joe is thrilled about his first date with Beck. He can't stop watching her throughout the day. Since Joe had stolen Beck's phone, she has bought a new one. Meanwhile, Beck struggles with financial and social pressures, and to keep her teaching assistant position, she agrees to have dinner with her professor. Down in the glass cage in the basement of Mooney's bookstore, Joe keeps Benji locked up. During a conversation about bagels and pastries, which Benji dismisses as gluten-free and peanut-free, Joe learns about his allergies. From their exchange, Benji figures out who Joe really is. Joe tells him that the only way out is to do exactly what he's told. That evening, Joe meets Beck for their date. They walk and talk pleasantly until Beck's phone rings. It's her friend Peach. She's calling about Benji's disappearance, which makes Joe decide it's time to finish the job. Beck says she has to leave, and their date ends. Joe returns to the basement and starts pressing Benji with questions, determined to piece together who he really is. Benji is an addict, and Joe uses this to get his phone's passcode. Benji passes out, and Joe takes a photo of him to post on social media, helping to dispel suspicion. Meanwhile, Beck's advisor invites her out for drinks under the guise of talking about her career. He flashes his wedding ring, telling her she's safe, but then touches her under the table. Beck pushes him away, and he retaliates by telling her to cover up and revoking her assistantship. Shaken, Beck calls Joe and asks to meet. They end the night with a pleasant conversation. The next day, Paco tries to get into the basement. Joe catches him and scolds him, straining their relationship. After losing her job, Beck talks to Peach, who writes her a check, though Beck isn't happy about it. Joe continues to toy with Benji, giving him 3 random drinks and offering freedom if he can guess which one is his own product. Benji fails, unable to identify it. Joe calls him a fraud. During the exchange, Benji mentions that Beck invited Joe to a party at Peach's that evening to make herself look good. That night, Joe and Beck attend the party, where Joe meets her friends. While browsing the books, Peach approaches and questions their relationship, but soon walks away. On the balcony, Joe and Beck grow closer. As they leave, an old acquaintance calls out to Joe, and they discuss what happened with Candace. Back home, Joe finds Paco looking upset. He gives him a book he stole from Peach's house and reconciles with him, telling Paco to hide it in a secret compartment behind his bathroom tiles. The next day, Joe finds Benji in bad shape, having destroyed valuable antique books in a fit. Joe learns that Benji once caused the death of a friend, but used his family's wealth to cover it up. Later, Beck visits Joe at work, telling him she showed her teeth to her professor, and it worked. They share their first kiss. At this point, Joe no longer needs Benji. He prepares a drink laced with something Benji is allergic to. Benji drinks it, collapses, and dies. Joe has finally gotten rid of Benji. 3 days have passed since he and Beck shared their first kiss, and everything seems to be going well. He and Beck are getting along better than ever, but Joe still needs to completely dispose of Benji's body. Meanwhile, Beck meets Blythe and they talk about their writing. Later, Beck shares this conversation with Peach. Beck spends time socializing with her friends, but as always, Joe is watching her. While talking with her friends, Beck admits she's still unsure about Joe, and Joe overhears it. Beck still hasn't fully connected with him and ends up hooking up with a guy at the bar. Joe gives Paco a list of supplies needed to get rid of Benji's body and asks him to buy them. While waiting for the items, Joe invites Beck to go shopping, and she agrees. When Joe picks her up, he watches her with an even stronger sense of obsession. During their shopping trip, Beck realizes her friend's writing is much better than hers and feels down, but Joe comforts her. His words impress Beck, and they are about to get closer when people suddenly interrupt them. After this, they don't talk for a short while. Meanwhile, Benji's body has badly decomposed and begun to smell, so Joe decides to move it out of the basement. The next day, Joe and Beck set up the bed they bought together. Joe gives Beck advice about her writing and her life, and they start reconnecting, until Peach suddenly shows up, looking sick. Joe drives them toward the hospital, but Peach insists on getting out of the car with Beck before they arrive. When Joe returns home, he finds police officers and Ron, Claudia's boyfriend, waiting outside his apartment. They have the list Joe gave to Paco, and suspicion is on him. Using his quick thinking, Joe explains the items are just gardening supplies and shows them to the officers. While Ron still doesn't buy it, the police believe him and leave. With the supplies in hand, Joe heads into the woods and prepares a fire to completely destroy Benji's remains. Beck calls him during this process, but Joe stumbles over his words because two strangers approach. He manages to get rid of them and finally finishes the job. Later, Beck visits Joe at the bookstore and tells him she realizes she doesn't really know him and wants to learn more. Joe takes her down to the basement where the glass cage is and talks about his life, his work, and his love for books. Beck begins to feel more connected to him and deletes her dating app. While talking at home with Peach, Peach notices one of her books is missing. It's the same book Joe gave to Paco. She accuses Joe of stealing it, but has no proof. In the end, Joe goes to Beck's apartment, and she welcomes him warmly. Joe has finally gotten what he wanted. Joe and Beck continue their relationship, but things take a strange turn when Beck starts receiving mysterious messages from someone named Captain. Joe notices this and immediately grows suspicious. Around the same time, Peach invites Beck on a trip, but Beck claims she's heading to a writing retreat instead. What she doesn't tell anyone, not even Peach, is that Captain is involved. Beck checks into a motel outside the city, and not long after Captain arrives. Unbeknownst to her, Joe is also there, secretly watching them. Captain sends Beck money, which she uses to buy special clothes. Joe monitors everything through Beck's old phone. But then, the truth is revealed. Captain isn't some stranger. He's Beck's father. Beck, however, has been telling everyone that her father is dead. Beck and her father attend a festival together where she meets his new family. Her father is a recovering addict who turned his life around with the help of a church and eventually remarried. This explains his long absence from Beck's life. Meanwhile, Peach grows more suspicious of Joe. She goes to his workplace, convinced he's been following Beck. When Beck shows up, she runs into Joe, who smoothly lies and says he's only there for work. Beck believes him. Soon after, Joe sees Beck's father with her, forcing Beck to confess the truth about her family. Surprisingly, this eases Joe's obsession for a while. Later, Joe joins Beck and her family for dinner, but tensions rise when Beck argues with her stepmother. Frustrated, Beck storms away from the table, and Joe follows, trying to calm her down. Instead, their conversation only makes things worse. Eventually, Beck goes to Joe's place, and the two reconcile. Their relationship now feels more solid than ever. In the end, Joe returns the stolen book to Peach's home. Yet deep down, Joe knows there's still one obstacle standing between him and Beck: Peach. Joe and Beck's relationship continues as usual. Joe joins a gathering with Beck's friends and analyzes them. Peach, suspicious of Joe, brings up the stolen book and tries to talk about it. Annika comes to Joe's bookstore. While she's there, Joe sees an old photo of Peach and manipulates Annika into posting it on her account. Joe and Beck get ready for a fancy date, but before they can leave, Annika calls Beck. Someone has leaked a racist video of Annika, destroying her career. Joe knows Peach is behind it. Their date is canceled, and Beck goes to comfort her friend. Joe begins following Peach more closely. During one of her runs, he tails her. Peach tells Beck that she has a connection with a literary agent who could help with her book. She plans to introduce them at a party in Joe's bookstore. At the party, Beck meets Roger, the agent. Peach provokes Joe. It's obvious she brought Roger to lure Beck away from him. Joe steals Peach's bag. He gets access to her laptop and finds her diary, which contains photos of Beck. When Joe goes upstairs, he overhears Peach and Roger talking and learns that Peach intends to sabotage Beck's career. The next day, Joe meets Annika and tricks her into giving him Peach's laptop password. When he gets home, Peach and Beck are there because Peach suspects Joe of stealing her belongings. Joe convinces Peach that she has her own stalker, managing to deflect suspicion from himself. Joe had hidden the laptop near Peach's house. He quickly retrieves it, tries the password, and gains access. On the computer, he finds secretly taken photos of Beck, proof that Peach is completely obsessed with her. Later, Beck meets Roger in his car. Roger makes advances, but Beck refuses and storms out. She then goes to Peach, angrily blames her for introducing Roger, and ends their friendship. Beck goes to Joe's place to tell him what happened. Just then, Peach calls. She has overdosed. Beck and Joe rush to her. Peach appears unconscious. Joe realizes she's faking it, but can't prove it. Peach is left alone with Beck while Joe heads home. The next day, Joe follows Peach during her run. When she enters a secluded spot, he attacks her from behind. It seems Peach is no longer an obstacle. Joe runs back home, only to find Ron lying on the ground. He wakes him, but Ron brutally beats him. Later, Beck calls Joe and tells him Peach has been attacked and taken to the ER. Peach is still alive. After everything that happened, Joe goes to visit Peach. Peach says that just as Joe had warned, she has a stalker, which clears suspicion off Joe. She tells him she doesn't want a man around, so Joe should leave. Joe finds a ticket in Peach's bag, round trip to Paris for 2. Beck comes to Joe's workplace and says she'll be leaving for a few days. Joe tells Beck that Peach is in love with her, but Beck gets angry and leaves. Joe discovers where Peach is going and sets off, but he gets into an accident on the way. When he wakes up, A police officer approaches him. Joe lies and manages to get rid of the officer. Joe arrives at Peach's house and sneaks inside. Because of the accident, he can barely stand. As he's about to stitch up the wound on his forehead, he faints. When he wakes up, Beck and Peach have returned home. Joe quickly hides. As Beck is about to shower, he sees Peach spying on her. Joe badly needs to use the bathroom and ends up using a jar he finds. He also notices that Peach has a gun. Suddenly, an old friend of theirs arrives at the house. Due to the accident, Joe keeps hallucinating about his ex-girlfriend. Peach talks to Beck about moving permanently to Paris, but Beck says she'll think about it. Later, the three of them take some pills together. Beck becomes completely out of it. The two friends try to get closer to her, and Peach kisses Beck. Beck thinks this is too much and leaves the room. Joe, still hiding under the bed, remains trapped there while Peach and her friend have sex. The next day, Beck confronts Peach and asks about the night before. She's angry at Peach for kissing her. After the argument, Beck leaves the house. Joe is holding Peach's gun when Peach suddenly attacks him from behind and knocks him out. When Joe wakes up, Peach is pointing the gun at him. Joe provokes her and seizes the chance to escape. Peach fires after him, hitting Joe in the leg. When she goes to check if he's dead, Joe overpowers her and kills her. Joe leaves behind a fake suicide note and gets away, but he forgets the jar of urine, which remains as evidence. He goes to a neighbor to get help for his wound. Beck texts Joe to tell him that Peach has died. Joe goes to Beck and comforts her. Now nothing will stand in their way. Joe goes to see a psychologist and tells him that his relationship has ended. The psychologist asks him when things were good between them. In flashbacks, Beck talks with Joe and tells him about her first kiss. They spend time together and share happy moments. Joe tries to put his obsessions aside. Beck loses her job, so Joe offers her a position working with him. During work, Beck mentions that she has been going to therapy, something Joe didn't know. When secrets start to appear between them, Joe's obsessions resurface. It turns out that the psychologist Joe is seeing is the same one Beck goes to for therapy. Joe begins to see the psychologist as an obstacle. Meanwhile, Ethan is unhappy with Beck's work style and talks to Joe about it. Later, when Joe runs into a police officer he met earlier at Peach's house, the officer calls him. Since Joe had given him a fake name, he lies and pretends to be that person, brushing the matter aside. Beck's birthday is coming up. Joe asks Beck's friends for advice. Beck wanted something simple, but her friend suggests the opposite. Joe follows the friend's advice. At the birthday party, Beck arrives, sees the surprise, and is upset. She reminds Joe that she had asked for something small. They argue. Joe accuses Beck of cheating and demands the truth. Beck says that without trust, everything is meaningless, and she walks away. In the following days, Beck shows up at Joe's place with donuts. At first, things seem fine, but Joe quickly realizes something isn't right. Beck receives messages from someone Joe doesn't know. Suspicious, Joe takes her phone when she leaves it behind and checks the messages. He begins following Beck, but she catches him. They argue again, and Beck insists that trust is the most important thing before leaving. Joe then follows the psychologist, planning to kill him. But since he doesn't have enough proof, he changes his mind. Instead, he hacks into the psychologist's computer and listens to Beck's therapy sessions. After hearing them, he abandons his suspicions, destroys Beck's old phone, and goes to her house to break up with her. When Joe returns home, he runs into his neighbor's friend. They get closer and start a relationship. Still, Joe cannot escape his obsessions. Joe is moving on with his new girlfriend, Karen. Everything seems to be going well between them, although Joe still can't resist checking in on Beck from time to time. He continues seeing his therapist and tells him that he has no issues in his relationship with Karen. One day, while walking, Joe checks Beck's social media as usual, but notices that her account has been shut down. Later that evening, while out with Karen, Joe unexpectedly runs into Beck. Although Beck tries not to show it, she is clearly jealous. After leaving, she sends Joe a message. From that point on, they begin texting each other every day. When Joe helps his co-worker move, Beck is also there, trying to get close to him. Afterward, Joe returns home to find his neighbor unconscious, with Karen taking care of her. His neighbor is an addict, so Joe locks her in the bookstore's glass cage to detox, with Karen staying to watch over her. Beck then invites Joe to meet up. Even though he knows he shouldn't, Joe goes. They talk, and soon things escalate. Joe cheats on Karen with his ex, and this cycle continues for some time. In the following days, Paco insists on seeing his mother, forcing Joe to take him to her. Meanwhile, Beck tells Joe in private that what they're doing is wrong and ends things between them. The next day, while at home with Karen, Joe tells her he wants to break up. Karen responds with understanding and leaves without causing a scene. Joe immediately runs to Beck's apartment, and the two get back together. When Joe returns home, he encounters his neighbor with Ron, her abusive boyfriend. Joe is furious, blaming Ron for everything, but his neighbor insists she is at fault. Meanwhile, Beck happily returns to her apartment, only to be confronted by Karen. Karen warns her, saying she owes her and that one day Joe will do to Beck exactly what he did to Candace. This marks the moment Beck realizes it's time to dig into Joe's past. Joe dreams of his ex-girlfriend Candace cheating on him, and while muttering her name, he wakes up. Beck hears it. During breakfast, Beck tries to get Joe to open up. Determined to erase Candace from his mind, Joe lies to Beck and goes to meet Dr. Nikki. While talking to Nikki, Joe recalls the first time he met Candace. Meanwhile, Beck and her friends are digging through Candace's social media accounts. At the cafe, a man is eavesdropping on them. Beck's friends say he might be a private investigator hired by Peach's family. Beck goes to Ethan for answers, but Ethan warns her not to dig deeper, saying Candace is long gone from Joe's life. At home, Joe pulls out a special book he once gave Candace and takes it to the basement of the bookstore. While repairing it, he relives the moment he discovered Candace's betrayal. Joe follows her and sees her with another man in a car. He later disposes of the book. Beck visits a mutual friend of Joe and Candace. The friend reveals that Candace cheated on Joe, that she had a sibling, and that she had been hospitalized. Beck continues her investigation and tracks down the man Candace cheated with. Joe also goes to the spot where he killed that man. When they discuss Candace, Joe loses control and pushes the man off a rooftop. Joe burns a page from the book he once gave Candace, believing he has finally let her go. Beck, still searching, discovers the hospital where Candace's sibling had been admitted, but learns they are already dead. Returning home, Beck confronts Joe asking for the truth about Candace. Joe lies about everything and manages to convince her. Joe then takes Beck to meet the bookseller who raised him since childhood. After this, Beck seems convinced. While walking, Beck's phone rings. Joe asks who Fox is. Beck brushes it off, but Joe doesn't believe her. Claiming the shop's alarm went off, he sends Beck home. Meanwhile, Joe confronts Dr. Nikki on the street and forcibly takes his phone. On it, he discovers the truth. Beck has been cheating on him with Nikki. Joe almost kills him but stops himself and walks away. When Joe returns home, he confronts Beck with what he knows. Beck admits her betrayal but tells Joe she loves him. Joe softens and convinces himself they can fix everything, forgiving her. The next morning, Joe peacefully goes out to buy breakfast. Paco shows up and gives Beck a book from Joe, also mentioning the hidden stash in the bathroom. Beck checks it and finds her personal belongings, her old phone, as well as items from Benji and Peach, including their teeth. Shocked, she drops what she's holding, breaking it. At that moment, Joe arrives home. Beck, trying to stay calm, attempts to leave, but her hand is bleeding from the broken glass. When Joe enters the bathroom, he sees the shards and the tooth, realizing Beck has discovered the truth. Beck tries to escape, but Joe catches her and knocks her unconscious. When Beck wakes up, she finds herself locked inside the cage. Joe watches Beck from a distance while she's locked in the cage. He tells her he will keep her there until she sees the truth, and then they will move past everything. Beck insists that Joe didn't do all those things, but Joe confesses everything and leaves the basement. Using Beck's phone, he texts her friends, trying not to raise suspicion. When Joe returns home, he is brutally beaten by his neighbor Ron. Later, he goes back to Beck and explains why he killed Peach and Benji. Hearing all of this, Beck has a nervous breakdown. Joe brings a typewriter into the cage, saying it will help Beck become more creative. Paco shows up at the shop and tries to steal the gun. Joe gets angry but understands why. Then Joe goes to Beck's friends and tells them he hasn't heard from her. He convinces them they had a fight because Beck cheated on him. The friends believe his story completely. Joe returns to talk with Beck. She tries to persuade him to go to the bathroom, but Joe notices her looking at the stairs and refuses. Beck has another breakdown, but after calming down, she realizes the only way out is to write a story that will impress Joe. Meanwhile, Joe uses Beck's phone to post fake updates on social media, keeping up appearances. A private investigator hired by Peach's family questions Joe about her death. Joe dodges the questions, but the PI remains suspicious. Paco attacks Ron from behind and knocks him down, but Ron gets up and chases him. Joe arrives just in time and understands what's happening. Before Ron can catch Paco, Joe kills him. He hides Ron's body in his car trunk and reassures Paco, telling him Ron will never hurt them again. This becomes their secret. Back at the shop, Joe finds Beck writing. He reads her story, which is actually an escape plan. In it, Joe clears his name and pins everything on Dr. Nikki. Beck convinces Joe they can run away together and start a new life. Joe opens the cage. As they kiss, Beck stabs him with a typewriter key and locks him inside the cage. She unleashes her hatred toward him and tries to escape, but the door is locked. Just then, Paco arrives at the shop and hears her cries. Beck begs for help and explains everything, but Paco, grateful to Joe for what he's done for him, walks away. When Beck returns, Joe is outside. He had a spare key. Beck hits him with a hammer, takes his key, and almost escapes. But Joe catches her before she can open the door. Joe later publishes Beck's story and frames Dr. Nikki. He buries Beck's body, along with the evidence, in Nikki's yard. The police arrest Nikki, clearing Joe of all suspicion. Paco moves away with his mother to another city. Joe believes it's all over, until Candace walks into the shop. She's alive, and she has come back.